On this episode of the CJ Sweat Show, we're going to discuss why two major NFL head coaches should retain their jobs. We're also going to get into the mess that has become the Pittsburgh Steelers, and we will discuss what happened this weekend that you potentially missed, but you definitely should have kept your eye on. There's a lot of stuff to get to. We're in the middle of college football bowl season. The NFL playoffs are just ahead of us. This is the CJ Sweat Show, and we start right now. I'm not bringing the bias here. You are.
What they do up there? Brainwash?
Hey, it's not my fault that your team is terrible.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
This is just honest. I'm sorry if it hurts. Okay, sure. I'm not really sorry.
Put that coffee down.
Can't stop, won't stop. Where the brakes at? I give him that diddy bop. Like, take that, take that, take that, take that.
This is the CJ Sweat Show. We are now live and brought to you out of Roanoke, Virginia. I am joined by my co-host, Chris Mason. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing very well, CJ. Thank you. A little bit of the after Christmas hangover at work today, but I'm up and moving well now.
And how was your Christmas?
It's very good. Very good. Thank you.
Did you get everything you wanted?
I didn't want anything, so I got more than I wanted.
Even a Cowboys loss?
Needed that, yeah. Thank you.
So listen, I mean, the Redskins were knocked out like forever ago. So I enjoyed Sunday as the Seattle Seahawks knocked out the Dallas Cowboys out of playoff contention. It was much to my delight. However, there has been discussion this past week about two major head coaches and two quarterbacks in particular, both of which have received a lot of grief from their fans. So Cowboy fans over the past week have been going after Jason Garrett because at the end of the game, a lot of fans were upset with his management. You've got it there close to the goal line. Why don't you give it to Zeke, run it, get the touchdown, instead he's throwing the ball. And a lot of people are going after Dak Prescott because, again, when they need him the most, he still is not coming through. But do you ever hear that expression, that's a poor man's fill in the blank? For example, you might hear a car salesman say, that Mazda RX-8, that's a poor man's Porsche. He's essentially telling you that the Mazda will remind you of the Porsche based on its look, sounds, how it drives, etc. Yet that Mazda, we all know, is no Porsche. Because the Porsche comes with a brand. It comes with a different engine. Premium steering. The fact that the salesman would compare the Mazda to a Porsche tells you everything you need to know about the Porsche. It's in a different class. However, you'll never hear a salesman say, that's a poor man's Mazda. Because in reality, although the Mazda is a nice car, there's a lot of Mazdas. There's only a handful of Porsches. Of course, there's nothing wrong with the Mazda. I have one and I absolutely love it. It's great, fun, reliable car. Nothing wrong with the Toyota. Again, great, fun, reliable car. But Mazdas aren't Porsches and Toyotas aren't Lamborghinis. The same is true with Dak Prescott and Kirk Cousins. Dak is a poor man's Russell Wilson. He's mobile, he's tough to sack, creative, great pre-snap, and frankly, I actually think he's a really good leader for that offense. Kirk Cousins is a poor man's Tom Brady. He has incredible vision, throws really accurate passes. He's quirky and super obsessed with his health. You could argue really the only big difference beside the fact that Brady is Brady is incredibly more talented, is that Kirk is a bit more mobile than Brady. Yet Dak Prescott will never be Russell Wilson, and we all know Kirk Cousins will never be Tom Brady. Because they're never going to carry a team on their shoulders for an entire season. They won't come back in the fourth quarter when down by 25 because they're Mazdas and Toyotas. They aren't Porsches and Lamborghinis. They're really reliable, fun, sometimes even dynamic, but they're never elite. It would be a shame to end the rant here, though. The point of this is that we need to stop expecting Cousins and Prescott to be elite. You don't need to be elite to win in the NFL. You need to be capable. Kirk and Dak are both perfectly capable. So it's time we shift the focus off of them and onto their team. I've been saying this for years. The Redskins' biggest issues are not quarterback and head coach. I could make the argument that the Redskins number of times this year. The Redskins were in games they should have never been in, and it was all because Jay Gruden put them in that spot. I could also argue the same for Kirk Cousins, who, by the way, is top 5 right now in the NFL in passing yards. Go look that up. He is one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL right now statistically. So I'm not going to put the blame on Kirk Cousins and Jay Gruden. Instead, look at the Redskins as a whole. They still, yet again, have no running game. The last time they had a running game was Alfred Morris's rookie season when they used a read option offense to exploit the lack of knowledge that was in the NFL about read option. The second they got away with that fun trick, the Redskins couldn't run the ball again, and they still remain one of the worst rushing teams in the NFL. Their other issue for I don't know however many years now is the Redskins still have absolutely no secondary. So when you don't have a running game, it makes it very difficult to retain leads, because when you have a 10-point lead and there's 8 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, Chris, what do you do to run the clock down?
Throw Hail Marys.
Yeah, exactly. Throw Hail Marys. No, you need to be running the football. And that's where guys like Ezekiel Elliott help out guys like Dak Prescott, as he can come in there, pound it away, get you those extra yards, and you can seal the victory. The other problem the Redskins have is they don't have a secondary. So when you play a quarterback like Drew Brees and you can't run the ball and you're constantly having these 3-and-outs late in games, and then you also don't have a secondary or a decent pass rush to lock down Drew Brees, to force him to make uncomfortable passes, well, then he's more than capable of coming back and beating you by 17 points. The Redskins had 2 games, by the way, where I thought they outplayed their opponent in the first half. The New Orleans Saints and the Minnesota Vikings. 2, by the way, very good teams. And if you watch those games, the Redskins came out very well prepared, played a very physical game, and should have won those games. But they lost because they didn't have the pieces to retain the lead. Had the Redskins won those games, had they had a nice running back or a nice secondary, the Redskins this weekend are 10-6 and in the thick of the NFC playoff race. If the Redskins are 10-6, none of you are complaining about Jay Gruden. Jay Gruden and Kirk Cousins did their job. Bruce Allen, the GM of the Redskins, yet again in the draft and in free agency, continues to mess up the Redskins. The same is true for Dak Prescott and Jason Garrett, by the way. Jason Garrett, I know he had some miscues at the end of that game, and I know Dak Prescott didn't have a great game, but you can make a really aging secondary like Seattle has look incredible when your best receivers are emotional Dez Bryant, who's not physically what he used to be, and 35-year-old Jason Witten, who if he became a free agent tomorrow would get multiple calls, not because of his tight end capabilities, because people want him to coach. That is the realm he's moving into. Jason Witten is the second best receiving target on the Cowboys roster. Dak Prescott has 0 elite receivers on that team. He has to rely on Zeke for them to get yards, and they also do not have a secondary. So it's incredibly difficult for them to come back and get it back in games that they were out of. They can't come back and win those games because they don't have any elite players on the outside to do it. So I'm watching these games. I'm telling you, Cowboy fans, if you didn't have Dak, you right now would be 5-11, and if you didn't have Jason Garrett, you would be 5-11. And Redskin fans, you'd be in the same boat without Jay Gruden or Kirk Cousins. These are not the causes of your issues. They are the duct tape currently holding together the mess that the rest of your franchise is. So stop telling me we should fire these coaches and we should get rid of these quarterbacks when they're the one thing holding you upright.
I agree with everything you said until you started talking.
Until I started talking?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, no, I do agree with the premise of it's not the coach's fault or necessarily the quarterback's fault, but, I mean, somebody has to take blame for these losses that both these teams have suffered in not making the playoffs. The issue was essentially, for Dallas in this past game anyway, not their defense by any means. Their defense was very stout at the fourth quarter. They just got tired of doing everything right and then seeing Dak Prescott throw pick sixes or turnovers in general. So that to me was the biggest issue as a Dallas fan. And I'm going to pose you a question too here in a second. Kirk Cousins, here's the issue with the Redskins. They went through quarterback after quarterback after quarterback. Finally, they found somebody. And now, unless something happens between now and preseason, they're going to lose Cousins. I mean,
they are going to lose
I don't
Cousins.
think he'll be back.
Nope. I completely agree.
So, with all that being said, my question to you is, this should take pretty quickly. If you're a Redskins fan, so we'll use the Redskins. If you could have a quarterback start for your team the next 5 years, would you start next year, but assume they're going to be there for 5 years, would you take Dak Prescott or Kirk Cousins?
To me, they equal each other out. I think there's things I like about Dak Prescott that I like over Kirk Cousins. Dak Prescott, I think, is a little bit easier going. He's more mobile to me. I think he thinks better on his feet than Kirk does. But Kirk, I think, reads defenses really, really well, is incredibly accurate with a lot of his throws, and sometimes gets a little over aggressive. That's maybe his big downside, is he gets over aggressive. I mean, I would maybe take Dak over Kirk a little bit, but to me, they're very, very in the same category of average to maybe above average quarterback, but certainly not elite.
I think with Kirk, you know what you're going to get. You're going to get typically an 8 to 10 win season. Sometimes make the playoffs and look good, sometimes not, just depending on who else is around him. With Dak, it's still a little bit of unknown. He could be a top 5 quarterback in the league, or he could just be an average quarterback.
Kirk Cousins right now statistically is a top 5 quarterback in the league. And Kirk, by the way, lost his top 2 receiving targets from last year. His offensive line was injured for like 75% of the season, and he still has no running game. So they're relying on him for essentially all of their offense. His best receiving targets this year, Vernon Davis, a tight end, and Jamison Crowder, who I'm a big fan of, but let's face it, Jamison Crowder is a slot receiver, a good slot receiver on his best days. He cannot be your premier receiving target. So Kirk lost a lot of weapons and still is one of the best quarterbacks right now in the league statistically. Now, I'm not saying he's elite by any means. I just said he's not. But I do think Kirk is a lot better than given credit for, and if you gave him the pieces of a running game, of a nice secondary, and you could retain some of these leads, the Redskins would be a lot better than they were this year. I mean, that mess against the Saints, when the Saints came back from 17 down, does not happen if you have an elite running back. But the Redskins couldn't run the ball on them. So the Saints forced some easy 3-and-outs. All of a sudden, Drew Brees gets the ball back. Down the field against a weak secondary. Score, you're back in the game. So listen, I think Kirk could be a really good quarterback in this league. I don't think Kirk or Dak will ever win a Super Bowl. I would be surprised at that. But the league also is known to change. The game of football is also known to change. And so, if certain things change, it could lean their way a little bit more. And you could put together a nice playoff run. I mean, look right now at the quarterback or the playoff race in the NFC. Case Keenum is going to have the number 2 team in the NFC. Nick Foles is going to have the number 1 team in the NFC. And Jared Goff, potentially the number 3 or 4 team in the NFC. So, I mean, right there are 3 quarterbacks I don't consider to be great, but they've got all these nice pieces around them. And when you give a quarterback nice pieces, they can do pretty magical things. I would still take, by the way, if you said Eli Manning or Kirk Cousins for the next year, I would take Manning. But Manning had absolutely nothing to work with, so he looks completely awful. So I think there's a lot to what does the quarterback have around you. And we're seemingly forgetting about that with Prescott and Cousins.
Yep, no, I agree with that.
All right, so again, there's a lot of good things to get to. The Rams, by the way, did something interesting. This I thought was interesting. So the Rams today are going to rest. You may get to this in the news. Jared Goff, Aaron Donald, Todd Gurley, and Woods, the receiver. I think his first name Roger. Blanking on his first name. Robert Woods. So they're gonna rest him this week. So the interesting thing about that is the Rams are still fighting for a 3 seed in the NFC. If they lose this weekend, they would then drop down to a 4 seed. So why would the Rams do this? Why would they risk that? Because if the Rams are a 3 seed and they win their wild card game, they would then go to play Minnesota in the divisional round. If they are a 4 seed and win their wild card game, they will then go play Philadelphia in the divisional round, where they could potentially face Nick Foles. I think they would feel a lot more comfortable facing Nick Foles than they would Case Keenum, as weird as that may sound. And also, they're not going to have to face Minnesota's really stingy defense. Chris, are the Rams up to some shenanigans here? Because that, to me, felt awfully shifty to be resting some players when you still need wins.
They're playing the 49ers.
They're playing the Niners have been great.
Great is a little bit of an overstatement, but
Garoppolo hasn't lost yet. They just beat Jacksonville.
Yeah, that's Jacksonville.
Jacksonville right now is like one of the top teams in the AFC.
Jacksonville's not legit.
It ain't your mama's Jacksonville.
Jacksonville's not legit. Now, I was wrong when I said I think at the beginning of the season they were going to win 4 games.
I think we were both wrong on that.
But San Francisco's looking okay. But at the end of the day, number one, I don't think there's too much difference between Philly and Minnesota. And number two, you're probably going to beat the 49ers at home. I don't care if C.J. Sweat was their running back.
I don't know that they'll beat the Niners. I really don't. I think what I have seen from Jimmy Garoppolo, he is the future of not just the 49ers. I think he's the future of the NFL. I think he's that next big face you're going to see. And I believe the NFC for the next 10 years is going to be a lot of Jimmy Garoppolo versus Carson Wentz. All right, so we're going to take a break. On the other side of this break, Chris is going to give us the news. Also, one college quarterback came out and said something this weekend that I thought was incredibly interesting, and I completely agree with what he said. So we're going to get to that and more. This is the CJ Sweat Show, and we'll be right back.
When I was little, I didn't talk for a long time. I liked things to always be the same. Anything new or different would scare and upset me. I was very sensitive to lights and sounds. It was almost like I had bigger eyes and ears than everyone else. So I built secret hiding places where nothing could get in. I didn't like looking people in the eye. It made me feel uncomfortable. I'd throw big tantrums over little things like when my socks didn't match. Sometimes I'd do the same things over and over. Until one day, I found out I had autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I learned how to live with it better.
You can see signs of autism in children as young as 18 months. Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org/signs. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council.
So during the break, by the way, Chris went and looked this up. This is an interesting stat. Chris, that Rams 49ers game, the betting line on this one moved after that announcement. How much did this one move?
Yeah, so it opened at the Rams -7, so Rams favored by 7 points, and now currently the 49ers are favored by 3 points, so a 10-point swing there.
So a 10-point swing just based on those moves. So I'm telling you, I think it's a big deal. I really do. Okay, so we are going to get to Chris with the news. All right, lead us away, newsman Chris Mason.
All right, major news out of Boston. James Harrison has signed a 1-year contract with the New England Patriots just in time for playoffs.
This is something we're going to get to. It kind of feels like to me the Steelers are just kind of falling apart. I mean, we know Belichick has been known to do this. Why let James Harrison just kind of fall out of the ranks like that if you know Belichick might go and sign him? Is it intentional?
Well, apparently Harrison knew what he was doing and getting out of his contract and wanted to make an escape from the team. Maybe because he got wind that New England wanted to sign him, and he thought it was a good chance to win another Super Bowl ring.
He's only going to make, by the way, off of this deal, he's only going to make $59,000. That's it. Which, I mean, to us, $59,000 for a few months is not too shabby. But for an NFL player who's been in the league for 17 years now, something crazy, that to me is wild that he would sign that contract.
Well, it's more about the endorsements, I think. I mean, the endorsements you're going to get for the New England region up there, it's going to be crazy. I'm sure you're going to see commercials and so forth.
Yeah.
In just general sports, legendary sportscaster Dick Enberg was found dead in his house last Thursday night.
Saw that, yeah.
His career lasted over 60 years. He had 13 sports Emmys and had been inducted into the Professional Football Hall of Fame.
Wow.
So rest in peace, Dick Enberg. College football, it's bowl season. We've already had a nice list of bowls. Last night was a decent game.
How about that bowl game last night in Detroit? The Quick Lane Bowl. Did you watch any of that one? Duke taking on Northern Illinois, and Duke just smoking the crap out of Northern Illinois. When Duke kicks the crap out of teams, like how they beat Northwestern earlier in the year, 41-17, and then like Northwestern's favored to beat Kentucky, which just makes Chris over the world excited. That to me makes me really happy.
The UCLA Kansas State game was decent. Kansas State had a nice comeback.
They did, yep.
2 more games tonight. Can't think of who's playing. 4 games tomorrow, and then, of course, we get into some of the bigger bowls leading into
We've got Boston College
playoffs.
and Iowa happening right now. Last I checked, Boston College had a 17-10 lead over the Hawkeyes.
Speaking of Boston. In other news, today is National Fruitcake Day.
That's disgusting. Ugh.
Yeah, I don't like fruitcake either.
That to me, why is that even a thing? Like, I can never figure out why fruitcake's a thing, but every Christmas, you see it for some of the stores, and people buy it.
Yeah, fruitcake sucks. If you like fruitcake, just go ahead and turn the podcast off. Stop listening.
We don't want you.
Yeah, our one listener, if you like fruitcake, go away.
Yeah. Even if you're related to me on a very direct level, we don't want you listening if you partake in fruitcake.
I do have another piece of news, but let's go ahead and end the news because this might lead into a little bit of a longer conversation.
Okay. All right, let's end the news. Chris,
that
thank
was
you for
your
that.
news.
All right, thank you, Chris, with that news update, giving you everything that's happening in the world of sports. Thank you, Chris. All right, so
last piece here.
Go ahead.
I gotta add this in. There was one major piece of news that everybody missed. Hasn't been talked about yet. Hasn't been shared on our Facebook page. Hasn't been shared on the website. But there was a team, Mason Domination, and they won the first inaugural CJ Sweat Show Fantasy Football League. I don't have the final score pulled up, but it was a lot. I mean, he won. It was a takeaway. Now,
well, congratulations, Chris, on winning our fantasy football league. I think that's warrant of an applause. So, great job, Chris, this year. A rough start to the fantasy season. Rough start. Ended 7-6. Won that last week just to get in. Beat me just to get into playoffs, and then went on just a tear through playoffs thanks to the one and only Todd Gurley.
Now,
and got that win.
Let me add something in here real quick. Not bragging to me at all, but although I did have a pretty awesome fantasy football. So, of course, this whole fantasy football thing was to raise money for Turning Point.
Yeah,
Turning Point. So we $20 buy-in. We had 12 guys in it.
Yep.
So $120. We're going to give half to Turning Point. I'm going to go ahead and say this. 100% of my winnings all going to Turning Point.
Oh!
Including my buy-in. I'm one of the few, so if you haven't paid yet, I'm one of those people who haven't paid yet. I'm buying in with my $20 that's owed. All the money's going to Turning Point.
That is awesome. That's worth another round of applause.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, everybody who played, and I'm sure Turning Point will appreciate it.
That's awesome. All right, so Chris is going to donate his winnings from fantasy football to Turning Point, which means we've now raised for Turning Point $240. So hey, that's a nice take home.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we will get that check written out to them and give that to the Battered Women's Shelter in Roanoke. Very nice of you, Chris, to do that. All right, so let's get to the stuff going on in Pittsburgh. This to me is a big problem because it's not just the James Harrison not just him signing with the Patriots. There are now stories out that Ben Roethlisberger has put a buffer between him and offensive coordinator Todd Haley. Now, I know Roethlisberger is a bit outspoken, but Chris, am I crazy to think that it's not a good sign on Mike Tomlin that the organization beneath him is crumbling? Like, can I say if a manager, can I decide whether or not somebody's a good manager based on the structure of their employees beneath them and the community there and the chemistry there? Because if this stuff is going on, and this is just what we're hearing, what else is going on behind the scenes that we don't hear? I think this is an absolute referendum on Tomlin and the emotional culture that he has created and allowed to ensue in Pittsburgh. And I think it's a big reason why, if they play the Patriots again in the postseason, the Patriots will obliterate them.
I don't disagree with the Patriots obliterating them, but that's no different than 1 year ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, depending on how far you want to go back. Is it a knock on Tomlin? I mean, Tomlin is who he is. Look, I know we've got a lot of Steelers fans that watch this. In my opinion, a little bit of a dirty coach. You know, He had the whole play back a couple years ago where he sticks his leg out to trip the guy running for the touchdown.
I mean, it's dirty. I just thought that was stupid.
Well, stupid and dirty. He's quote-unquote a player's coach, although some of his more traditional players aren't a big fan of him from what we're hearing. But I think you're reading a little bit too much in between the lines here. I mean, who knows if this is actually true? It's kind of been rumored. I don't think they would actually let that get out if it was true. You know, and I don't think Big Ben would necessarily do that. I think Pittsburgh in general is just a little bit of I'm not going to say that, but just a little bit. There's some sketchy things going on between the players and coaches and so forth. But I would like to just leave it at that. And are they going to beat the Patriots? Probably not. I mean, they're going to have to go into New England and win, and I just don't think that's possible. So,
well, listen. Here's my thing with Tomlin. Try and think of one thing that he does that elevates that team. Like, just give me one thing. I mean, that team's got one of the best quarterbacks in the league, the best receiver in the league, I think the best running back in the league, and a top 10 defense in the league. So what is it that Mike Tomlin does that elevates them beyond where they should be?
How do you get all those players playing on that level without a good head coach?
You've got a good GM. Who knows how to scout. I mean, they constantly pick up the best receivers.
But if you had a good GM, and you're arguing Tomlin's not a good coach, then he wouldn't just put up with him in there. Right, he would make sure.
No, the Steelers are slow to fire because the Steelers ownership, I forget the name of the new owner, but that ownership, that guy was actually fired early on in his career, was so upset with it and has been so touched by it that he's very slow to fire or cut anybody. That's part of the reason why James Harrison was on that team as long as he was, and it's part of the reason Mike Tomlin has hung out as long as he has. They do not like to fire people there.
Well, so yeah, I agree with that, but I don't think that if it's like, oh, well, we're a good program, we're just going to stick with our guy, even though he's a cancer to our team. So I think they would just get rid of him. I don't think that Tomlin's there for a reason, and he is a heck of a football coach, in my opinion. Now,
I don't know what he does. Like, if somebody could tell me one thing he does that makes that team better, I'd listen to you. Like, I could tell you one thing, Jay Gruden does better than a lot of coaches. He always has the Redskins really, really prepared. Belichick, incredible attention to detail. Pete Carroll, who I think has a lot of the same weaknesses as Tomlin, his teams are always incredibly aggressive, and they play like that. That, by the way, is falling apart a little bit because of the emotional issues. But
I would say
at least I've
Tomlin
got
does
something.
that too. He also gets his guys emotionally prepared for the game.
I don't think they're ever emotionally prepared. Because, whenever they play the Bengals, it's like the Bengals are constantly under their skin, and there's fights, and there's penalties that shouldn't be there.
They always beat the Bengals, though?
Not always.
Most of the
the same thing with the Ravens too. It's like any of those divisional opponents, they'll go back and forth with, and there's fights.
That's pretty much true, no matter what team you are, though.
I don't think it's every team. I want to know, what is it Tomlin does that makes this team better? Because I'm looking at it today. James Harrison gone. Ben Roethlisberger upset. There's now a buffer between him and Haley. Ben Roethlisberger came out today and said he thinks James Harrison knows the offensive playbook better than Sammy Coates did before he went to the Browns. And I know all of these aren't technically Tomlin's fault, but I do wonder, how much control does Tomlin have of that organization if all of these problems are ensuing beneath him? At some point, can't I put some of the blame for the turmoil that's going on right now back onto Tomlin? I feel a little bit justified in doing that.
Well, I mean, no, I don't think you can. Tom was not responsible for letting go of Harrison. He didn't say, get rid of Harrison. That, Harrison wanted out. And I don't think it had much to do with Tomlin.
But here's the thing: no, you never hear of anybody wanting out of New England, and you would never hear about Tom Brady and an offensive coordinator.
They get a Super Bowl ring every other year.
What's that?
That's because they get a Super Bowl ring every other year.
Well, I mean, maybe that's part of it, but I also think, Nick Saban, he wins all the time. But players, when they come out of Alabama, they talk. I didn't like. You can go back and look. There's a lot of players that come out and say they didn't like playing for Nick Saban because he's too much of a control freak and
sure.
he's angry all the time. Players at least like playing for Belichick. What I don't understand about Tomlin is how we have all of these issues, because this would not happen in New England. You would not hear about a scuff between Tom Brady and Josh McDaniel for more than an hour before Belichick dealt with it. And with Tomlin, we have it. It feels like every single week, and it feels like every year, as we get closer to the postseason, there's more and more problems.
I don't understand why we're comparing the Patriots or the Steelers to the Patriots, though. They're not. We know they're not. As an NFL fan, we know that the Patriots are well above where the Steelers are right now.
But they shouldn't be, though, is the thing. Because here's why I compare them. Because the Steelers, to me, have the most talent right now in the NFL. I don't think there is one team in the NFL more talented than the Pittsburgh Steelers today.
What's the most valuable position in the NFL?
Quarterback.
Right. So you have Big Ben, 385 pounds, overweight quarterback who can't move, and then you have Tom Brady, the best quarterback to ever play the game.
Well, yeah,
that's why the Patriots are the Patriots.
Big Ben is a top 5 quarterback in the league.
No.
There's Brady. I would say Rodgers is second. I don't know. I'd maybe put Russell Wilson at third.
Big Ben's only good because of the talent he has around him.
Big Ben's always been good, though. And sure you could say the talent he has around him. But, Big Ben makes throws 75% of the quarterbacks in the league can't make. And every time Big Ben gets injured, that is a completely different team. But if you look at the running back, top running back in the league, you look at the receiver, top receiver in the league, you look at that offensive line, not great, but certainly right around top 10, and then that defense is absolutely incredible and has been for years. I'm trying to figure out what Tomlin does that makes the Steelers better than, let's just say, makes them better than the Bengals. What does Tomlin do specifically? Don't give me wins and losses, because that, again, I think is a talent issue. What does Tomlin bring to the table that makes him a better coach than his opponent? Because I've never been able to figure it out, and this continues to be issues. Okay. All right, college football playoff preview. Let's get to this. All right, so let's start off. We're going to break down the 2 semifinal games that are going to happen this weekend. All right, so the first game I want to get to, because this to me is the most confusing game of them all, is Oklahoma versus Georgia. Chris, I look at this game, I see Oklahoma as a team with a very dynamic offense. Although they have Baker Mayfield, they're not relying on him. They've got one of the best rushing attacks in the country. But I also wonder, what can they do defensively? And I think that defense is a big problem. I look at Georgia, very, very reliant on their run game to win. But again, they're going up against Oklahoma's defense. And Georgia, I think, can contain Baker Mayfield with their defensive front seven. So I think Georgia's got this slight edge in this one. But that offense with Oklahoma is so dynamic, I just don't know where to go with this pick. So give me some of your thoughts as we go into these semifinal games.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of echo what you said, where the other game, the Alabama-Clemson game, we're looking at 2 very comparable teams. They're both just very solid on both sides of the ball.
Yeah.
Here, we're looking at 2 very different teams if you just look at offense versus defense. Georgia will stymie you. They allow 10 points a game. Let me give you the exact number. Might be closer, 13 points a game, while Oklahoma scores 45 points a game.
And remember, too, Georgia, that part of that average is when they traveled to Auburn and got steamrolled. But, I mean, listen, that's a weird game. They got off to a rough start. That's not going to happen again, not with weeks to prepare. So that I think although they didn't look good in that game, I think that's their outlier, and that adding into the 13-point total makes me think Georgia's defense is better than even what people are saying.
Yeah, and I know, we'll talk about how good is the SEC, but anytime you have to travel in college football, especially in the SEC, especially against a top-tier team like Auburn in the SEC, it is going to be tough to stop their offense.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely.
I mean, and the same thing's true of somebody traveling into Clemson. Death Valley is the hardest place to play in college football. So when teams travel there, it just becomes that much more impossible for them to win. So, look, a loss at Auburn, even though they did allow 40 points a game, Auburn did some kind of, I won't call it trickery, but some different plays to score the ball early in that game. Which they had to do to get off to a good start and win the game, eventually win.
No, completely agree. So we look at this game. Georgia's favored here by 1.5. I lean Georgia because I think they are more of a complete team than Oklahoma is. But if Oklahoma can shut down Georgia's run game, or at least limit it, and Baker Mayfield can do what he needs to do on his side of the ball, I think Oklahoma could end up winning this one by anywhere from 7 to 10 points. All right, so give me your pick with this one. Georgia, Oklahoma. If you had to put money on the line tomorrow, which one would you go with?
I would take Georgia. I think Georgia wins by probably a touchdown. If you want a final score, I'll say like 33 to 20, whatever the touchdown works out to be, 26.
Yeah. I lean somewhere right around there. I would go 27 to 24 Georgia. I think Oklahoma is going to get off to a hot start in this one. I just think Georgia's too deep defensively to let that continue, and I think Oklahoma's defense is just not up to the challenge to play with Georgia. I think Georgia's too good for that. And by the way, I do like the fact that Kirby Smart has been at Georgia for 2 years, while Lincoln Riley has only been at Oklahoma for just this year. The other thing too here is as good as the Oklahoma offense has looked all year, they've played a lot of crappy defenses too. I mean, they played Ohio State, but Ohio State also allowed Iowa to score 50-plus on them. So I look at Oklahoma and what they've done offensively, and I'm not going to lie, Oklahoma's offense is really, really good, but I do think there's something about maybe they're a bit overrated heading into this game. Okay, let's shift gears to Alabama-Clemson. This, to me, I think is an easier pick, but I think it's the more interesting game. So the interesting part about it is Alabama favored by 3 points in this game, although they are the lower seed. So are you a bit surprised by that?
No, it's Alabama. Why would I be surprised about Alabama being favored in a football game? No.
Yeah. So here's my thing with this one. I think Kelly Bryant is a really good quarterback. I think he is better than Jalen Hurts. And I also trust Clemson's defense a bit more than Alabama's. I think the coaching match here maybe leans Saban because of he's going to go down as the best coach in college football history. But I do think Dabo Swinney has caught up to Nick Saban. And the past 2 times they've played, I think Clemson, even though they only won 1, I think they beat Alabama both times physically. So I do think Clemson goes into this game with a bit of an edge in that regard. And a lot of the reason Vegas goes with Alabama on this line, I believe, is just purely off of Nick Saban and what Alabama's defense historically has done. But if you watched Alabama this year, it has not been the same team. And I think they lucked out a little bit by not playing in the SEC championship because I think they would have been exposed again.
Yeah, perhaps. I look at it. One thing I'm looking at right now actually is Clemson's schedule. And so they played some tough games, especially the start of the season. They beat Auburn, which was like a complete dogfight.
Yeah.
And then, or should I say, catfight. Sorry.
Nice with the pun.
They beat Louisville, who was a big win at the time, but then
and it was in Louisville.
Right. And then phased out. They beat Virginia Tech handily at home. So they've got some nice wins here. beat NC State at NC State only by a touchdown. Of course, the one blemish on their schedule is to Syracuse on a Friday night. We've talked about that game plenty of times. And then they blow out Miami. I mean, just an absolute blowout. And
Well, also blew out South Carolina, too.
Well, yeah, South Carolina wasn't that tough of a team.
They were ranked, though.
Sure.
Ranked and in South Carolina.
In a rivalry game, yeah. So and they won pretty handily. So they've got a lot of nice wins here. But I just look at this Auburn or Alabama defense, and you're right. Hurts is not the best quarterback in the league. I mean, but he's what an Alabama quarterback is. He manages the game. He's good at handing the ball off, and Harris has a ton of touchdowns for the season, and they're just able to manage and get wins. And they don't need to necessarily score a lot when they have Alabama's defense. So who allows like 94 rushing yards per game and under 250 for the season.
No, I definitely think you're on to something there. With Jalen Hurts being able to just simply manage the game. My problem with Alabama is they need to play at home to win these games. They went on the road to Texas A&M and struggled. They went on the road to Mississippi State and struggled. They struggled for a little bit against Florida State, playing on a neutral site. Clemson, though, they are not beholden to playing at home. Like, if you look at this team, they go into Louisville. And I know they're not great, but Louisville still finished 8-4. So it's not like it's a shabby team. They didn't have the fallout Florida State had. They go into Louisville, they win that one 47-21. They go into Virginia Tech, and you and I watched that game together, and I told you, I'm like, Clemson's just too physical for Virginia Tech to be in this game. And you knew it the first play of the game. Like, you knew it first drive of the game, Clemson's way too physical. They did have the blemish in Syracuse, but like you said, we've talked about that. They went into NC State and won. They went into South Carolina and physically manhandled South Carolina. I just like what Clemson's able to do on the road. I looked at the schedule at the start of the year, and I think I told you this. I'm like, they played too many tough road games for them to come out of this undefeated or with just one blemish. They're going to lose a couple of them, and they didn't. What Dabo Swinney has done with the preparedness of this team has been absolutely remarkable. Last year, by the way, so 2 years ago, was the first time they really got a chance at Alabama. Last year, they knew what they were doing. They were more experienced, and they went into that game and they played with a completely new level of confidence that nobody in the country can play with. I think we're going to see that this weekend. So, Chris, I'm going to bet against the Vegas line. I'm taking Clemson to win this game this weekend, although I think it's going to be absurdly close. It's going to be very, very back and forth. I'm going Clemson 30-27 to win that semifinal game.
I am completely against you here. So I'm taking Alabama by 10 points in a very low-scoring game, 17-7.
17-7. So you really think Kelly Bryant's only going to put up one touchdown?
Auburn did score 26 against them. Mississippi State only 24, LSU only 10, Tennessee 7, Arkansas 9 points, Ole Miss 3 points. Ole Miss has a good offense. Vanderbilt didn't score against them. Florida State only scored a touchdown.
Yeah, all of those teams have one thing in common. None of them have the offense Clemson has. So that's why, and none of them, by the way, I think are as well coached as Clemson is. So that's why I think, Clemson's got a bit of an edge here, and I think they're going to score some points. We've also known, too, by the way, when these games are expected to be defensive, there ends up being a lot more scoring than we're anticipating. The over-under here, by the way, is 47 points. So I said 30-27. I'm a bit over that. You said 17-7, so you're way under that. But we'll see what happens. That game will be played in New Orleans. So probably Alabama would have, I would think, a bit edge as far as fan bases go. Yeah. As far as who shows up more for that game. I think there'll be a bit more Alabama fans. Probably more of a wash.
Yeah, maybe some. I've been to I went to the NCAA basketball tournament in New Orleans a couple years ago, and so Kentucky's fan base just travels well. So there was definitely more Kentucky fans than anybody else of the four teams that were there, but it was Ohio State, Kansas, Louisville, Kentucky. So all those teams travel pretty well, and people want a reason to go to New Orleans anyway. So people will drive from Clemson to New Orleans to watch the football game. So you'll see more Clemson. And Clemson's football fan base is huge, and it's a
it is.
It's a national program. So
It is. Completely agree with that.
I think it'll be pretty close.
So here's the other thing. Josh Rosen came out this week, and people are like freaking out about this. I saw this story, and people freaked out about it. Josh Rosen came out and said, I don't want to play for the team with the highest draft pick. And so everybody's like, oh my gosh, you can't say that type of stuff. The arrogance that exudes out of you, and this is just going to be such a big problem with, picking you high in the draft is you're just so arrogant. I hate when people tell me a quarterback is arrogant and use that as a reason to not draft them. You want to know why? Chris, who do you think right now? Think about this one for a second. Give me the name of one NFL quarterback who is known for being arrogant. Tom Brady. So he's pretty good, right?
He's all right.
Can you think of one other that's pretty much known for being arrogant?
I mean, not on that level.
Okay, so Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers came in his rookie season and told Brett Favre, he said, oh, I'm going to replace you and I'm going to outperform what you did here. I mean, he just straight up told him that in the locker room. He's a 24-year-old kid. I mean, imagine, you're in a very well-accomplished financial planner and, you've got all of these big accounts and, you're maybe kind of running off into retirement. And then this kid graduates college and his very first day on the job comes in and says, oh, yeah, I'll do more sales than you do and I'm going to make more money than you will. You'd be pretty ticked off by that, right? And that'd be a bit arrogant. When it comes to quarterbacks, the arrogancy, I don't care about that because what it tells me is they're willing to take shots and they're incredibly confident. What I don't want is I don't want a timid quarterback. Quarterbacks who are timid never win in this league. I told you at the start of the year what to look for with some of these quarterbacks. And I told you there would be 2 quarterbacks I thought would hit and there would be 2 quarterbacks I thought would not hit. So the 2 quarterbacks I told you would not be good would be Mitch Trubisky and Deshaun Kaiser. All right, so Deshaun Kaiser, we can all agree right now, has already bust. Mitch Trubisky is well on his way. And then the 2 quarterbacks I told you would be great, I said Deshaun Watson's going to pop this year, and Pat Mahomes, give him 2 to 3 years sitting behind Alex Smith, learning that system with Andy Reid. He'll come out, and he's going to be a really good quarterback. He, by the way, is going to get his first start this Sunday. And I think Pat Mahomes is going to be really good. So my prediction about the NFL draft this past year has been right on the money. So I went up and I looked at Josh Rosen's scouting
Mahomes is
report.
only playing because they're arresting Alex Smith.
No, he's only playing because they're arresting Alex Smith. So the jury is still out on Pat Mahomes.
Sure.
The jury's still out on him. But, I mean, you watched Trubisky this year.
Oh, Trubisky was miserable.
Yeah, Trubisky's miserable. You watched Deshaun Kaiser this year.
Yeah.
Miserable.
For a little while.
Yeah, that's a complete mess. And we watched Deshaun Watson, who I think has a lot of promise in this league.
Now, that surprised me. That not that he was a good quarterback or will be a good quarterback in the league, but how fast he did it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the injury slowed him down a little bit.
The injury did slow him down, and he definitely popped more than I thought he would. But I predicted at the start of the year, during this draft, I said, Deshaun Watson is the one quarterback everybody should be looking at. Forget the rest of these guys. And so, I look at Josh Rosen's scouting report, and when I made these predictions early in the year, I said there are 3 traits to look for, and 2 of them are going to tell you whether or not they're good. And 1, if a scout tells you they rely on this for their stats, run for the hills. So I said if a scout tells you they rely on passing strength, they rely on strength, that is not the sign of a great quarterback. Lots of quarterbacks come into this league and can throw the ball 60, 70 yards. It does not make you great. Virginia Tech fans, don't forget about Logan Thomas as you think about that. I said, but the 2 things you should look for are traits of game instinct, and you should also look at their accuracy in college. So, Josh Rosen hits about 65% of his passes in college, and I looked at a scouting report. They said his instincts inside the pocket are absolutely incredible. He knows exactly where to throw the ball to. He's got incredible footwork. Meanwhile, I went and looked at Baker Mayfield. You know what people said? He's got super quick feet. He is really happy in the pocket. When he gets pressured, he does not make the best decision at times, and he plays in a very, very basic offense. Josh Rosen played in a pro-style offense. It's very complex. It's not easy to learn. He will transition just fine into the NFL. Yet everybody today wants Baker Mayfield, and nobody wants Josh Rosen. And everybody wants the nice Sam Darnold. Nobody wants Josh Rosen. I'm going to go ahead and make a prediction. Out of this quarterback class, Josh Rosen will outperform every other quarterback that gets chosen. He will be the next star in the NFL. I like him because of his aggressiveness. I like him because he's a little bit arrogant. He's got a chip on his shoulder, and he came out and said, yeah, I want to be taken later on in the draft. And I've got no problem with that.
I would rather.
I mean, listen, if you're an NFL quarterback and you've got all this talent in the world, and you're going to go get drafted, wouldn't you prefer to go somewhere that maybe you will be valued and your career will be elevated versus a place like Cleveland, which constantly suppresses quarterbacks?
No, I want to go to like the Chargers. So it's like a team that's on the up and rise. They've got an older quarterback that's going to play for a couple more years.
Yeah,
and they're they're in LA.
Chargers would be a perfect fit for Josh Rosen.
Yeah, that would be a great fit for him.
Oh, I'd love to see him there.
But it's the guys, and a part of this is like not necessarily the talent of the quarterback. Unfortunately for them, it's where they go. Like, name a quarterback that has been drafted by the Browns between now and like the last 20 years that's still in the league.
Yeah,
none of them.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just. I mean, that's completely unfortunate. So it's probably the same thing. I mean, before. Well, Washington was a good example of that. They drafted several quarterbacks, and now they finally got one, but it was just kind of a mess there for a long time.
Yeah. Chris Canover in the chat says he thinks Mahomes will be the best quarterback from this draft.
Agreeing with you.
He also thinks with the right coach, Trubisky will be very good. I do think there is something to if Trubisky had a more offensively minded coach, he would be better. But I've watched too much of Trubisky, and his completion percentage in college was 59%. As a sophomore and junior in college, he could not beat up the guy above him. I just don't like that fit at all. I don't think he's an NFL quarterback. I said it 7 months ago. I'm going to say it again right now. He will not play very well at this level. Josh Rosen, I think, is fantastic. And I saw today that the Browns are considering taking Baker Mayfield at number 1. You go right ahead. You take a warm weather quarterback who likes to run around more than he does to sit back and read through progressions, and you take a quarterback with happy feet, and you let me know how that works out, because it's going to be Johnny Manziel 2.0.
I see Baker Mayfield. He could be a great quarterback in the league. I mean, if he goes to somewhere, even like the Colts, I know that's like, and that's assuming like Luck goes somewhere else. Like he could make the Colts a better team, I think, in the long run.
If he goes somewhere where he can hang out for 2 to 3 years and learn an NFL offense, and a coach can go in there and teach him how to move around in the pocket correctly, I think Baker Mayfield could be really good in this league. But if he goes to the Browns, they're going to say, well, we need you to start, week 1 because Hugh Jackson's job is on the line. That thing's not going to work out at all. You're going to play against physical Pittsburgh and physical Baltimore and physical Cincinnati, and you're going to win those games? Forget about it. Yeah. He's going to be injured by week 8 and is going to be another bust in the Cleveland franchise.
Yep.
All right. So good show today. Chris, congratulations on winning fantasy. And again, thank you. Chris is going to donate his fantasy winnings to Turning Point, bringing, again, our total amount raised for Turning Point to $240. So thank you again, Chris, for doing that. We will be back again live next week. And we're going to have a really good show then, because we're going to have the playoff semifinals that take place this weekend. The NFL playoffs, we will be right on the verge of that. That will be in our horizon. So lots of good things to come. Thank you all for joining us. This is the CJ Sweat Show, and we'll see you next week.
Watch me hit the gray button.